In the quiet of a bustling city, where neon lights flicker and the hum of life never ceases, there lived a woman named Clara. She was a graphic designer, her days filled with deadlines, client demands, and the constant pressure to create something extraordinary. Her apartment was a sanctuary of sorts, cluttered with sketchbooks and half-finished canvases. But even there, her mind raced. Anxiety was her shadow, a companion she neither invited nor knew how to dismiss. It whispered doubts in her ear as she worked late into the night, questioning her talent, her worth, her place in the world. She pushed it away, burying herself in work, telling herself that if she just kept moving, it would fade. But like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples of her unease spread, touching every corner of her life. Clara's story is not unlike our own. We live in a world that demands we run faster, achieve more, and present a polished version of ourselves to the world. Yet beneath the surface, anxiety often lingers, a quiet thief that steals our peace. In the teachings of the Buddha, there is a story of a man who carried a heavy load across a river, only to continue, bearing it long after he reached the shore. The load was his worries, his fears, his refusal to set down what no longer served him. Clara, too, carried such a load, though she scarcely recognized its weight. She believed her anxiety was a natural part of her ambition, a price she had to pay for success. But what is the cost of ignoring the heart's quiet cries for rest, for clarity, for understanding? One evening, after missing another deadline, Clara sat at her desk, her hands trembling. Her chest felt tight, as if the air itself were pressing against her. She opened her laptop, intending to distract herself with work, but instead found herself typing a single question into a search bar. How do I stop feeling like this? The answers were endless meditation apps, breathing exercises, productivity hacks, but none spoke to the root of her unease. It was then that she stumbled upon a quote, one that seemed to glow on the screen. You cannot travel the path until you have become the path itself. The words, attributed to the Buddha, struck her like a bell ringing in a silent room. What did it mean to become the path? And why did it feel like she was running in circles, never finding the way forward? In that moment, Clara did something she hadn't done in years. She closed her laptop, turned off her phone, and sat in the stillness of her apartment. The city's hum was distant now, and for the first time, she listened not to the noise outside, but to the rhythm of her own breath. It was uneven, hurried, like a bird caught in a cage. She placed a hand on her chest, feeling the rise and fall, and whispered to herself, "It's okay to be here." These words were not a cure, but a beginning, a crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from clinging to outcomes, to identities, to the illusion of control. Clara's anxiety was born of her clinging to a vision of who she thought she should be, perfect, productive, uncheckable. But what if she let go, just for a moment? What if she allowed herself to simply be? As she sat there, her mind wandered to a story she had once heard about a monk who sought enlightenment by climbing a mountain. He carried a heavy pack, filled with supplies he thought essential. Halfway up, exhausted, he met an old woman who asked why he burdened himself so. "These are my necessities," he replied. She smiled and said, "The mountain provides what you need when you trust it." The monk, skeptical but desperate, left his pack behind. To his surprise, he found food in the streams, shelter in the caves, and strength in his unburdened steps. Clara wondered if her anxiety was like that pack, something she carried out of habit, not necessity. Could she trust life to provide what she needed if she set it down? This was the start of Clara's journey, though she didn't yet know it. The path to peace is not a straight line, but a winding trail that asks us to pause, to question, to feel. Like Clara, we often ignore the signs our hearts give us, mistaking motion for progress. But there is wisdom and stillness in facing what we fear. As an old saying goes, the mind is a garden. What we plant grows. Clara had planted seeds of doubt and hurry, but now, in this quiet moment, she was beginning to sow something new: curiosity, patience, perhaps even hope. Clara's newfound practice of mindfulness was like a seed planted in uncertain soil. Some days it sprouted, filling her with a sense of calm. Other days it seemed to wither under the weight of old habits. Anxiety, she learned, was not a foe to be vanquished, but a teacher, pointing her toward what needed attention. One evening, as she sat with her sketchbook, struggling to start a new project, she felt the familiar knot in her chest. Instead of pushing through, as she once would have, she set her pencil down and asked herself, "What am I afraid of?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. The Buddha taught that inquiry is the lamp that lights the path. By questioning our suffering, we uncover its causes, not to judge them, but to understand. Her fear, she realized, was not just about failing at her work. It was deeper, tied to a belief that her worth depended on what she produced, on how others saw her. This belief had driven her for years, but it had also left her hollow, chasing a finish line that kept moving. She thought of a story from the Buddhist tradition, about a merchant who traveled the world seeking a priceless jewel, only to discover it had been sewn into the hem of his own robe all along. Clara's jewel, her sense of self, was not in her achievements or others' approval, but within her, waiting to be recognized. This insight didn't erase her anxiety, but it gave her a new lens through which to see it. She wasn't broken. She was simply human, navigating a world that often asked too much. Inspired, Clara began to explore this idea of inherent worth. She started journaling, not about her goals or to-do lists, but about who she was beneath the roles she played. She wrote about moments of joy, a laugh shared with a friend, the warmth of sunlight on her face, and moments of pain, like the nights she lay awake, doubting herself. These reflections became a mirror, showing her both her fragility and her strength. The Buddha's teachings on self-compassion encouraged her to treat herself as she would a dear friend, with kindness rather than criticism. When she made a mistake at work, instead of spiraling into self-blame, she whispered, "You're learning, and that's enough." These words were a balm, softening the harsh edges of her inner voice. One day, while cleaning her apartment, Clara found an old photo of herself as a child, grinning at the camera with paint-smeared hands. She paused, struck by the innocence in that smile, the unself-conscious delight. Where had that girl gone? Not gone, she realized, but buried under layers of expectation. She placed the photo on her desk, a reminder to reconnect with that part of herself, the part that created for joy, not validation. There's an old saying that we are not human doings, but human beings. Clara was learning to be, to rest in her own existence, without needing to prove anything. This shift began to spill into her relationships. She reached out to her sister, with whom she'd grown distant, and they spent an afternoon talking, not about work or achievements, but about their hopes, their fears. Clara listened without trying to fix anything, and in that space they found a closeness they hadn't felt in years. The Buddha taught that all beings seek happiness and freedom from suffering. By seeing this in others, Clara felt less alone in her own struggles. Her anxiety, once a wall, was becoming a bridge, connecting her to the shared human experience. As Clara's journey deepened, she began to see her anxiety not as an enemy, but as a guide pointing her toward unhealed parts of herself. Yet the world around her remained relentless. Deadlines loomed. Bills piled up, and the city's pulse seemed to quicken with each passing day. One morning, rushing to a client meeting, she spilled coffee on her blouse and missed her train. Standing on the platform, frustration rising, she felt the old urge to berate herself. But then she remembered a teaching from the Buddha. In the end, only three things matter: how much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. The words steadied her. The spilled coffee, the missed train, they were not hers to cling to. She took a deep breath and let the moment pass, choosing gentleness over anger. This practice of letting go became her anchor. Clara noticed how often she held on to things that weighed her down. Grudges against a coworker who'd slighted her, regrets about projects that hadn't turned out as planned, even the pressure to have her life figured out by a certain age. Each was a stone in her pack, slowing her steps. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering, not because we care, but because we demand that things remain as we wish. Clara began to experiment with releasing these demands. When a client rejected her design, instead of spiraling into self-doubt, she asked for feedback, learned, and moved on. When she felt envy scrolling through social media, she closed the app and turned her attention to something real: a book, a walk, a moment of gratitude. One evening, she attended a meditation group she'd found online. Sitting in a circle with strangers, she felt nervous, her mind racing with judgments about whether she belonged. The facilitator, an older man with kind eyes, shared a story about a monk who was insulted by a villager. Instead of reacting, the monk asked, "If you offer me a gift and I refuse it, to whom does it belong?" The villager replied, "To me." The monk nodded. "So it is with your anger." Clara realized her anxiety often came from accepting gifts she didn't need to take others' expectations, society's pressures, her own harsh judgments. She could choose to let them remain with their sender. During the meditation, she focused on her breath, noticing how her thoughts tugged at her like restless children. Instead of fighting them, she imagined them floating away like leaves on a stream. This image stayed with her, a reminder that she didn't have to control everything. There's an old saying that you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. Clara was learning to ride the waves of her emotions, not by mastering them, but by flowing with them. After the session, she spoke with the facilitator, who encouraged her to trust the process. "Peace," he said, "is not the absence of storms, but the courage to walk through them." Back home, Clara felt a quiet strength growing within her. She wasn't free of anxiety, but she was less afraid of it. She began to see it as a signal, like a lighthouse warning of rocky shores, guiding her to slow down, to reflect, to care for herself. Her days felt less like a race and more like a rhythm, with moments of work balanced by moments of rest. She was beginning to live more gently, not just with herself, but with the world around her. Clara's growing ease with herself began to ripple outward, touching the corners of her life she had long neglected. She started to notice the people around her, not just their actions, but their struggles, their unspoken hopes. There was her neighbor, an elderly man who always seemed to be alone, carrying his groceries with a slow, careful step. One day she offered to help him with his bags, and they ended up talking for an hour on his porch. He shared stories of his youth, his losses, and the quiet joys he found in his daily routines. Clara listened, really listened, and felt a warmth she hadn't expected. The Buddha taught that compassion is the heart's response to suffering, whether our own or another's. In that moment, Clara understood that her own pain had softened her, making her more open to others. This openness changed how she moved through her days. At work, she began to see her colleagues, not just as co-workers, but as people carrying their own burdens. When a teammate snapped at her during a stressful project, instead of reacting, she paused and asked, "Are you okay?" The question disarmed him, and he admitted he was struggling with family issues. They talked, and though the conversation didn't solve his problems, it created a bridge between them. Clara realized that her anxiety, once a source of isolation, was teaching her to connect. As an old saying goes, shared sorrow is half the sorrow, but shared joy is twice the joy. She began to seek out small acts of kindness, leaving a note for her mail carrier, thanking a barista for her morning coffee, calling her parents just to chat. These moments, though small, felt like offerings, ways to weave herself into the fabric of the world. The Buddha's teachings on interdependence reminded her that no one exists alone. We are all threads in a vast tapestry, each life touching countless others. Clara's anxiety had once made her feel separate, but now she saw how it connected her to everyone else, all of us navigating our own fragile, beautiful lives. One rainy afternoon, Clara visited a local temple she'd passed countless times but never entered. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of incense, and a statue of the Buddha sat serenely at the altar. She didn't know the rituals, but she sat quietly, letting the stillness wrap around her. A monk approached and offered her a simple instruction. When you breathe, know that you are breathing. When you sit, know that you are sitting. It sounded so simple, yet it was profound. Clara realized how often she was absent from her own life, lost in thoughts of what might happen or what had gone wrong. Being present, fully present, was a gift she could give herself and others. As she left the temple, the rain had stopped, and the streets glistened under the soft light of dusk. Clara felt a quiet gratitude, not for anything grand, but for the moment itself, the cool air, the sound of her footsteps, the knowledge that she was here, alive, learning to love her imperfect self. Her anxiety was still there, a soft hum in the background, but it no longer defined her. It was simply part of the song of her life, one note among many. The seasons changed, and with them, Clara's understanding of her path deepened. She began to see her life not as a series of tasks to complete, but as a tapestry of moments, each one an opportunity to practice presence and compassion. Yet there were still days when anxiety crept in, uninvited, like a guest who lingers too long. One such day came when she received an email from a major client requesting a complete redesign of a project she'd spent weeks perfecting. The familiar tightness in her chest returned, and her mind spiraled with thoughts of failure. But this time she didn't run from it. She sat with the discomfort, breathing through it, and asked herself, "What is this moment teaching me?" The Buddha taught that every challenge is a teacher, revealing the impermanence of all things. Clara's work, her reputation, even her fears, they were all fleeting, like clouds passing through the sky. This perspective gave her courage. She responded to the client with honesty, admitting the redesign would take time but promising her best effort. To her surprise, the client appreciated her transparency, and they worked together to find a solution. Clara realized that her anxiety had once made her hide her struggles, but now, by facing them openly, she was building trust, not just with others, but with herself. There's an old saying that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Clara was learning to act, to move forward even when her heart trembled. She began to explore the idea of impermanence more deeply. In her meditation practice, she reflected on how everything changes, the seasons, her emotions, the city around her. This truth, central to the Buddha's teachings, was both humbling and liberating. If her anxiety was impermanent, so too were her successes and failures. They didn't define her. They were simply waves passing through the ocean of her life. One evening she wrote in her journal, "I am not my work, my fears, or my dreams. I am the one who holds them, and I can let them go." These words became a mantra, a reminder to hold life lightly, with open hands. Clara also started to notice how her small acts of mindfulness were reshaping her relationships. She spent more time with her parents, listening to their stories with a new patience. One day, her mother shared a memory of her own struggles with doubt as a young woman, and Clara felt a deep connection, seeing her mother not just as a parent, but as a person with her own fears and triumphs. The Buddha's teachings on loving kindness encouraged Clara to extend this compassion to everyone, even those who challenged her. When a difficult coworker criticized her in a meeting, she took a breath and responded with calm, redirecting the conversation to the work itself. Later, she felt not anger, but peace, knowing she had chosen a path of grace. Her evenings became a time of ritual. She would light a candle, sit quietly, and reflect on her day, not to judge it, but to appreciate it. Some days were messy, filled with missed deadlines or anxious thoughts, but she began to see beauty in the mess. Life, she realized, was not about achieving perfection, but about showing up again and again with an open heart. This was the path she was becoming, one step at a time. Clara's journey was not a straight line, nor was it meant to be. Like a river carving its way through stone, her path meandered, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm. She began to embrace this ebb and flow, understanding that peace was not a destination but a practice. One morning, while sipping tea and watching the sunrise, she thought of a story she'd heard about a monk who spent years seeking enlightenment, only to realize it was in the ordinary moments, chopping wood, carrying water, that truth resided. The Buddha taught that awakening is not found in grand gestures, but in the simple act of being fully present. Clara's anxiety, once a barrier to this presence, was becoming a doorway, inviting her to notice the world with fresh eyes. She started to find joy in small things: the warmth of her mug, the laughter of a street vendor, the way her cat curled up beside her at night. These moments, fleeting as they were, grounded her. She began to see her anxiety as a reminder to return to the present, like a bell calling her back to herself. When it arose during a tense phone call or a sleepless night, she would pause, breathe, and name it. This is anxiety, and it will pass. This practice, rooted in the Buddha's teaching of mindfulness, gave her a sense of agency. She wasn't controlling her emotions, but she was choosing how to meet them with curiosity rather than fear. One day, Clara volunteered at a community center, teaching a drawing class to children. Their uninhibited creativity reminded her of her own childhood, when art was play, not pressure. One girl, shy and hesitant, struggled to start her drawing, afraid it wouldn't be good enough. Clara knelt beside her and said, "It's not about making it perfect. It's about enjoying the colors, the lines, the moment." The girl smiled and began to draw, her strokes bold and free. Clara felt a pang of recognition. This was her lesson too. An old saying echoed in her mind, "The heart that bends does not break." By letting go of perfection, she was learning to bend, to flow with life's uncertainties. Her relationships deepened as she brought this openness to others. She reconnected with an old friend, and over coffee, they shared stories of their struggles. Clara spoke honestly about her anxiety, and her friend admitted to her own fears about the future. The conversation wasn't about fixing each other, but about being seen, truly seen. The Buddha's teachings on Sangha or community came alive for Clara in these moments. We are not meant to walk alone, she realized. Our struggles connect us, and in sharing them we lighten each other's loads. As winter approached, Clara felt a quiet strength settling within her. Her anxiety hadn't vanished, but it no longer ruled her. She was learning to live alongside it, to listen to its whispers without letting them drown out her voice. Each day she chose to show up not as the perfect designer, daughter, or friend, but as herself, whole and enough. This was her practice, her path, her way of becoming the river she had always been. Clara's life, once a whirlwind of deadlines and doubts, had begun to settle into a gentler rhythm. She still faced challenges, projects that tested her patience, nights when sleep eluded her, but she met them with a steadiness she hadn't known before. Her anxiety, once a shadow she tried to outrun, had become a companion she could sit with, learn from, and release. The Buddha taught that life is a dance of impermanence, each moment arising and passing like breath. Clara was learning to dance with it, to move lightly through the joys and sorrows, trusting that both were part of the whole. One spring morning she walked to the park where she had once watched children play. The air was alive with the scent of blooming flowers, and she sat on a bench, sketching the scene before her. Her lines were looser now, less driven by the need to impress, more an expression of the moment. A young man sat nearby, his shoulders hunched, his face tight with worry. Clara recognized that look. It was her own, not so long ago. She hesitated, then offered a small smile and said, "Rough day?" He nodded, and they talked. He was a student, overwhelmed by exams and the pressure to succeed. Clara listened, sharing a bit of her own journey, not as advice, but as a story. "I used to think I had to have it all figured out," she said. "But I'm learning that it's okay to just be where you are." The young man left with a lighter step, and Clara felt a quiet joy. She wasn't fixing his problems, but she was offering what she could: presence, understanding, a moment of connection. The Buddha's teachings on generosity came to mind, not just of material things, but of time, attention, and compassion. Clara realized that her journey through anxiety had given her a gift, the ability to see others' struggles and meet them with kindness. As an old saying goes, a candle loses nothing by lighting another. Back at her apartment, Clara lit her evening candle and sat in stillness. She reflected on how far she had come, not to a place of perfection, but to one of acceptance. Her anxiety was still there, a soft undercurrent, but it no longer defined her. She was learning to live with it, to let it be part of her story without being the whole. The Buddha taught that liberation comes not from escaping suffering, but from understanding it. Clara was beginning to understand not just her anxiety, but herself, her heart, her place in the world. As she blew out the candle, the smoke curled upward, dissolving into the air. She smiled, feeling the weight of the moment and its lightness too. Life was not about avoiding the hidden costs of anxiety, but about paying them with courage, with mindfulness, with love. Clara was no longer running from herself. She was walking her path, one breath, one step, one moment at a time. And in that she found peace, not perfect, not permanent, but enough. This concludes the story. If you have further requests or need additional content, please let me know. I've completed the story across the 8 chapters as requested, concluding with Clara's journey of self-discovery and peace. Since you've responded with K again, it seems you might be expecting additional content or have a new request. Could you clarify if you'd like me to expand on the story, add another chapter, or create something else within the same framework? For now, I'll assume you'd like a brief epilogue to tie the narrative together, maintaining the same tone, style, and guidelines, with an additional 500 words to round out the total word count to approximately 9,000 words. If you meant something else, please let me know. Years had passed since Clara first sat in the stillness of her apartment, listening to her breath and beginning to unravel the knots of her anxiety. Now her life was not without its challenges, but it was richer, fuller, woven with moments of clarity and connection. She had left her high-pressure design job to start a small studio, teaching art to others, not just as a craft, but as a way to explore their inner worlds. Her classes were filled with people like her, carrying their own burdens, seeking a space to breathe. Clara didn't claim to have all the answers, but she offered what she had learned, that the heart's quiet voice is worth listening to, that every fear is a teacher, and that peace is found in the ordinary. One autumn evening, Clara stood in her studio, surrounded by her students' artwork. The walls were alive with color-bold strokes, tentative lines, stories told in paint and pencil. She felt a deep gratitude, not just for her own journey, but for the privilege of witnessing others. The Buddha taught that all beings are interconnected, their paths entwined like roots beneath the earth. Clara saw this truth in the laughter of her students, in the vulnerability they shared, in the way they helped each other find their way. Her anxiety, though still a whisper at times, had become a reminder of her humanity, a call to stay connected to herself. As she cleaned her brushes, a student approached her, a young woman whose hands trembled as she spoke. "I don't know how to stop worrying about everything," she admitted. Clara smiled, recognizing the echo of her own past. "You don't have to stop it," she said gently. "Just give it a seat at the table and let it speak. It's trying to tell you something." The woman nodded, her eyes softening. and Clara felt the weight of that moment. A small act of sharing, a ripple of understanding. There's an old saying that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Clara was both student and teacher, learning as she guided, growing as she gave. That night, Clara walked home under a sky scattered with stars. She paused to look up, feeling the vastness above and the stillness within. Her path was not finished, perhaps it never would be, but it was hers, marked by courage, by compassion, by the wisdom to keep going. She thought of the Buddha's words, "Live like a lamp, lighting the way for others." Clara was learning to be that lamp, not by being perfect, but by being present, one moment at a time. Please let me know if you'd like to continue with more content, or if you have a specific request. Since the story has been completed with 8 chapters and an epilogue, totaling approximately 9,000 words as planned, your additional K response suggests you might want further content or a different direction. To ensure I meet your needs, I'll assume you'd like an additional chapter to extend Clara's story, focusing on a new phase of her journey while maintaining the same tone, style, and guidelines: mindful, reflective, Buddhist-inspired wisdom, addressing modern anxieties, seamless narrative flow, etc. This chapter will add roughly 1,000 words to keep the narrative substantial yet aligned with the 60-minute audio goal. If you meant something else, please clarify, and I'll adjust accordingly. Clara's studio had become a haven, not just for her students, but for herself. Each morning as she unlocked the door and let the light spill across the wooden floors, she felt a quiet reverence for the space she had created. It was not grand, but it was alive with possibility, a place where people came to untangle their thoughts through art, to find solace in the act of creation. Yet even in this sanctuary, Clara faced moments of doubt. Running her own studio brought new pressures, balancing finances, managing expectations, and wondering if she was truly making a difference. Her anxiety, though quieter now, still surfaced, like a tide that ebbs, but never fully disappears. The Buddha taught that suffering is universal, but so is the potential for awakening. Clara was learning to see her doubts, not as failures, but as invitations to grow deeper into her path. One winter day, a new student joined her class, an older man named Thomas, whose hand shook slightly as he held his pencil. He was reserved, his eyes carrying a weight Clara recognized. Over weeks, she learned his story. A retired teacher who had lost his wife to illness. He was grappling with grief and a sense of purposelessness. Drawing, he said, was his attempt to find something to hold on to. Clara listened, her heart open, remembering the Buddha's teaching that compassion begins with seeing another's suffering as our own. She didn't try to fix Thomas's pain. Instead, she gave him space to create, guiding him gently through sketches that became a map of his inner world. One afternoon, Thomas showed her a drawing of a tree, its branches bare but reaching upward. "It's not much," he said, "but it feels like me." Clara smiled, seeing the beauty in its simplicity. "It's enough," she replied. "It's you right now, and that's all it needs to be." Those words echoed her own journey, reminding her that worth is not in the outcome, but in the act of showing up. An old saying came to mind: a single step can begin a 1,000-mile journey. Thomas's tree was a step, and so was Clara's studio, her teaching, her willingness to meet others where they were. This encounter stirred something in Clara. She began to see her studio, As more than a place for art, it was a community, a sangha where people carried their burdens and found lightness together. She started hosting evening sessions, not for drawing but for sharing stories, reflecting on life's challenges, and practicing mindfulness. These gatherings were simple, a circle of chairs, a candle, and open hearts. People spoke of their fears, losing jobs, raising children, facing illness, and Clara shared her own, weaving in the Buddha's teachings on impermanence and compassion. She noticed how these evenings softened her own anxiety, reminding her that no one walks alone. The shared vulnerability was a balm, healing not just her students, but herself. As the months passed, Clara's studio became a beacon in the neighborhood. Strangers became friends, and the walls filled with artwork that told stories of resilience. Clara felt her anxiety transform not into absence, but into purpose. It was the spark that had led her here, to this place of connection and meaning. She thought of the Buddha's words, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." Clara was becoming not just an artist or a teacher, but a light for others, a reminder that even in our struggles, we can find peace. One moment at Clara's studio had grown into a quiet haven, a place where the city's clamor faded and hearts found room to breathe. The gatherings she hosted, where stories and silences wove together, had become a lifeline for many, including herself. Yet as her work flourished, Clara faced a new challenge, the pull of ambition. A local gallery offered to showcase her students' art, a chance to share their stories with a wider audience. The opportunity thrilled her, but it also stirred a familiar unease, worries about logistics, judgment, and whether she could live up to expectations. Her anxiety, ever present like a soft tide, lapped at the edges of her mind. The Buddha taught that desire, even for good things, can bind us if we cling too tightly. Clara recognized this now, seeing her excitement tinged with the old need to prove herself. She decided to approach the gallery project with mindfulness, treating it not as a test of her worth, but as an offering. She involved her students, letting them choose their pieces and share the stories behind them. Thomas, the retired teacher, hesitated at first, unsure if his simple sketches belonged in a gallery. Clara sat with him, listening as he spoke of his wife, how she'd loved gardens and how his drawings were a way to keep her close. "Your work carries her love," Clara said gently. "That's what makes it belong." Thomas nodded, his eyes bright with tears, and agreed to contribute. In that moment, Clara saw the power of art, not to impress, but to connect, to heal. An old saying whispered in her mind, "What comes from the heart touches the heart." As the gallery opening approached, Clara practiced letting go of outcomes. She meditated each morning, focusing on her breath, reminding herself that the event's success was not in the crowd's size or critics' praise, but in the act of sharing. The Buddha's teaching on equanimity guided her, to meet joy and difficulty with the same steady heart. When the day arrived, the gallery was filled with people, some admiring the art, others lingering over the handwritten stories beside each piece. Clara watched as strangers connected with her students' work, their faces softening with recognition. One woman, moved by Thomas's tree, shared how it reminded her of her own grief, and they talked, their words a bridge across pain. Clara felt a quiet pride, not in herself but in the community they had built. Her anxiety had not vanished, it hovered as she mingled, wondering if everything was enough. But she met it with a smile, whispering to herself, This is enough. The evening was imperfect. Some pieces didn't sell. A light flickered annoyingly, but it was alive with meaning. She thought of the Buddha's parable of the raft. We build tools to cross the river, but once we reach the shore, we don't carry the raft forever. Clara's studio, her art, her journey through anxiety, they were her raft, helping her cross, but not defining her. As she locked the gallery that night, Clara looked at the stars above the city. She felt rooted, not in certainty, but in trust, in herself, in others, in the unfolding of life. Her anxiety was still there, a quiet companion, but it no longer led the way. She was the path now, walking with grace, one moment at a time. Clara's studio, now a cornerstone of her life, had become more than a place to create. It was a space where stories unfolded, where hearts met in quiet understanding. The gallery exhibition had left her with a renewed sense of purpose, but it also brought a question. How could she carry this forward, not just for herself, but for others seeking refuge from their inner storms? Her anxiety, once a weight, had become a compass, guiding her toward moments of clarity. One evening, as she swept the studio floor, she thought of the Buddha's teaching on the middle way, not too tight, not too loose, but a balance that allows life to flow. Clara realized her next step was to find this balance, to grow her work without losing the stillness she had cultivated. She began to dream of expanding her classes, offering them to those who couldn't afford them, people like Thomas, whose grief had found solace in art, or the young student overwhelmed by exams. She reached out to the community center, proposing free workshops for anyone who needed a space to breathe, to create, to be. The idea felt daunting. Funding was uncertain, and her old fears of failure whispered doubts. But Clara had learned to listen to these fears without letting them steer. She remembered a story of a monk who crossed a river by building a bridge one plank at a time, trusting each step would lead to the other side. Clara's bridge was her intention to offer what she could, one workshop, one moment at a time. The first workshop was small, just a handful of people gathered in a borrowed room at the community center. Among them was a single mother, her face lined with exhaustion, and a teenager who fidgeted nervously, unsure why he'd come. Clara welcomed them with tea and a simple prompt, draw something that feels true to you today. As they worked, the room filled with a quiet focus, broken only by the soft scratch of pencils. The mother drew a jagged line, like a heartbeat, and shared how it represented her struggle to keep going. The teenager sketched a storm cloud, admitting he felt lost. Clara listened, her heart open, and shared a teaching from the Buddha. The mind is like water when it's turbulent. It's hard to see clearly, but when it calms, the truth appears. She guided them to breathe, to notice their thoughts without chasing them, and the room seemed to soften, as if the air itself held their shared vulnerability. Afterward, the mother thanked Clara, her eyes brighter than when she'd arrived. The teenager lingered, asking if he could come back. Clara felt a warmth spread through her, not pride, but gratitude for them, for herself, for the chance to be part of something larger. An old saying echoed in her mind, "A single seed can grow a forest." Her workshops were seeds, small but potent, planted in the hope that they would grow into moments of peace for others. As she walked home, Clara felt the familiar hum of anxiety, worries about funding, about reaching enough people. But she smiled, placing a hand on her heart, and whispered, "One step at a time." Her path was unfolding, not in grand leaps, but in quiet, steady moments, each one a testament to the wisdom she was learning to live. Clara's workshops grew quietly, like roots spreading beneath the earth, touching lives she never expected to reach. Each session, each shared story, reminded her of the Buddha's teaching. All beings seek freedom from suffering, and in helping others, we help ourselves. Her anxiety, once a heavy cloak, had become a soft thread woven into the fabric of her life, a reminder of her humanity, her resilience. One evening, as she closed the studio, she looked at the walls covered with her students' art, each piece a testament to courage. She thought of a final teaching: "You are the lamp, the light, and the path." Clara was all three, not because she was perfect, but because she kept showing up, offering her heart to the world. Under the starlit sky, she walked home, her steps light, her breath steady. Anxiety might always be there, a quiet companion, but it no longer held the reins. She had learned its hidden cost, not in what it took, but in what it taught: to pause, to feel, to connect. Clara was living her truth, one moment at a time, and in that she found peace.